It's Tuesday, July 18th, 2017. Our panelists today, Shannon Reeves, Associate Professor at Alabama A&M, and James Lomax, a commercial real estate broker. Stay tuned. We got a great show coming up. It's Yellowhammer TV Live with Dale Jackson. Welcome to Yellowhammer Live TV. I'm Dale Jackson. We've got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about polling. We're going to talk about the Senate race. We'll talk about the breaking news in the health care debate. But let's do it all right now when we get into the headlines. You know, I thought it was ridiculous that we've been following the United States Senate race where the debate is over who loves Donald Trump the most. The answer is everyone loves Donald Trump in this Senate race. They're all thrilled with him, and they're all huge fans. Here's something I didn't expect to come up in this race: the legalization of medical marijuana. But yesterday, the United States Senate race changed a little bit. Dom Gentile, one of the candidates for Senate, dropped out and endorsed Mo Brooks, also announcing that his wife is suffering from cancer. During that press conference, Congressman Mo Brooks mentioned that he himself was in favor of medical marijuana. It was more of a 10th Amendment argument, I believe, where he was making the argument that it's up to the states and maybe the states should decide. Let's talk to our panelists about this. James Lomax, this is kind of surprising. Mo Brooks is a big 10th Amendment guy, but I was surprised to hear that he's so in favor of medical marijuana. Apparently, his votes on the floor of the House back this opinion up. This isn't some new opinion that he's come to, but I surely didn't expect to hear it. Have you heard this before?
Well, I kind of wonder if that's what he did to get the Dom Gentile endorsement. I don't think it is, because really that endorsement doesn't carry that much weight at all. But I do think it's a good 10th Amendment issue that all federal candidates need to be bringing up. It's really smart to kind of punt that to the states and let the states decide. But let's be honest. In Alabama, it's not going to happen anytime soon. I mean, this is a state legislature that couldn't figure out a lottery. Yeah. So they're not going to be able to figure out medical marijuana for quite a while.
Shannon, when we talk about stuff like this, medical marijuana, this is something that we'll sort of do one of these things where we say, well, as California goes, so goes the nation. Eventually, maybe we'll get to something like this. We've seen the abuses of this in other states. I always tell this story. I was on a plane on the way to Las Vegas, and a guy sitting next to me was like, we were just having a conversation. He's like, hey, I got a guy. He'll say you have a bad back and you can get some medical marijuana in Vegas. And I'm like, no, I'm good. Red Bull and vodka is fine for me in Las Vegas. Like James said, any chance this becomes an actual issue in this campaign, or is this just a little one-day blip?
Well, first I want to say I'm not certain that Congressman Brooks' position is that he's for it, rather than saying he believes that the federal government may not need to control it, that the federal government should leave it to the states, and each state make its own decision amongst its voters and its legislatures. First piece. Second piece is the state of Alabama, based on its finances, the legislature's got to consider all types of opportunities when it comes to revenue. Will it be successful as an issue? I don't believe so. I don't believe Alabama's there, as James stated. The lottery, there are a lot of contentious issues, and with Alabama politics, I don't think that's necessarily.
James, back to you just real quick here. This issue, it will probably not be one in this race, to be honest, but it is rather interesting to see that in a Republican United States Senate race in Alabama, this issue is a safe one to bring up.
Yeah, a blip on a radar. It is a 10th Amendment issue, and I think Mo Brooks played that the right way. I think that all federal candidates should be kind of punting that over to the states in a lot of regards.
All right, let's move on back to a governor's race in Alabama. Yes, we have to go all the way to 2018 to actually see this taking place. The Senate race obviously is leading the way. Mayor Tommy Battle in the city of Huntsville is considered one of the front runners in this race. If you look at the money he's got, more than anyone else, unless you talk about money people have given themselves. But what I find interesting about Mayor Tommy Battle is he has been in the front of multiple tax increases. And recently, there was a tax increase on hotel rooms in his city. It's about 15%, one of the lower ones in the state, but nonetheless, it's yet another tax increase, and there have been other taxes in his city as well. He's running in a Republican primary. Shannon, real quick, I mean, let's think about this. He's running in a Republican primary. He still didn't hesitate to touch this thing that should be a third rail in Republican primaries. How much do you think this will affect the governor's race?
I don't know how much it will affect the governor's race, but I say good for Mayor Battle. I think it's about time that we have politicians that have some courage to even say, look, we've got to say, taking these pledges to say, I'll never ever raise a single tax. The government can't buy asphalt and concrete for the same price they bought it for 20 years ago. You have to look at what the government needs, what the people's needs are, and then adjust accordingly. We as citizens are going to have to pay for the government that we want. And look at what's happened in Huntsville, the growth, the prosperity. It's not waste, it's not bloat. I'm sure there can be other things, but the courage to stand forward and say, hey, we're going to assess it, but we're going to have to also be willing. If we want to be like other states, we've got to be willing to pay for it.
All right, James, you do commercial real estate. You've watched as the city of Huntsville, because you live in that city, has boomed. Does this have any impact on that? I mean, again, it's paid for by out-of-towners because it's hotel rooms. It's for a convention center, which should bring in more people in order to use those hotel rooms. The average citizen's not going to see it. Can you get that nuanced in this, or will his political opponents say he raised taxes?
No, it's a quality of life issue, and I do get so irritated with this narrative. I finally agree with Shannon on something that it's irresponsible for people to say that they're never going to increase taxes. That's not the conservative thing to do. That's being irresponsible. And listen, Tommy Battle, I think people look at conservatism based on how well they manage funds and how good of stewards they are with their tax dollars. And Tommy Battle has improved the credit rating in Huntsville. He's maintained it. He's passed a balanced budget, which I think Montgomery could use. And Dale, this argument, I mean, Tommy Battle runs this city, or Huntsville, like a business. And people always say they want a businessman. Well, business understands you need to increase revenues. And the things he's done with taxes go towards bringing in new businesses, bringing in more people that will increase those revenues, make the city a better place.
Let me just interrupt you here for a second, because you're doing a lot of explaining. Let's talk about the political aspect of this. If you're a Republican candidate running for governor, Battle just gave you a hammer to beat him with.
Yeah, you can hit him with a hammer, but he can also hit back by saying, look at what I've accomplished, look at what this city's doing, and look how prosperous it is.
Okay, moving on. Let's discuss the Don Jr. saga. Now, on the national stage, this has sucked all the air out of the room, except for healthcare, which we'll debate here in just a second. You know, we were told from the very beginning, Donald Sr., he wasn't your normal politician. He was going to tell it like it is. He was going to hire the best people. Well, so far in the last 7 days, we've learned that every politician would have taken this meeting. They've lied constantly, and they've looked wildly inept. James, Don Jr., the story's still going. We've heard about 3 different examples, or excuses rather, about what has happened here and why it happened here. And even the latest, the press secretary contradicts Donald Trump and says, oh, it was about adoptions. Well, Donald Trump says, no. Anyone would have taken this meeting and tried to get that political opposition research. Why? I mean, why? I know it sounds like a stupid question, but why are they so bad at this?
Well, I feel like they're always on the defensive. They always feel like they have to defend their position in some sort of way, rather than just flat out saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't have taken that meeting, but we did, and here's why. And I feel like they're worried about explaining because they never want to look bad. And that's something that every now and then there'll be a little egg on your face, and you just got to accept that and move on.
Shannon, why all the lying? I mean, and it's the most easily disproven lies you could ever have. Oh, we didn't know it was about Russian influence. And then in the emails, in the body of it, he's saying, oh, yeah, that would be great. Right before the election would be even better. Why the obvious lying? Why?
In the private sector, when you have your own company, you're not publicly held, you're privately held. You have a life where you're not accountable to anyone. And there's a culture of doing it the way we want to do it. When you translate that, or transfer that mentality and that life to being in the White House, where now you're living in the bubble, it's a total culture change. And it's been, when we have wealth, we tend to be emboldened when we have wealth, right? A little privilege in a sense. But government will humble you. And now they put themselves in a situation where in this bubble, every direction that they turn, there's always criticism, much different from what it was like in the private sector. And they're having a problem making their transition.
But this criticism is all, I mean, I hate to say it, I'm a big fan of calling out the media for bias and things of that nature. But Shannon, the simple fact is the media's right on this. They've damaged themselves by how hard they've gone at this administration. And there are people inside the media that will acknowledge this. But on this, they're right.
Yeah. The problem is there's no way, this is a big problem. And while we'll talk about it, the press will write about it, different articles we've written, it's about that special counsel, right? The way that special counsel goes will tell the story. This is a serious problem, and it's going to continue to grow.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Lastly, the next topic, polling. You know, I hear a lot on my radio show about fake news and rigged polls and things of this nature. And basically it all boils down to polling that we don't like. And when we see things we don't like, we immediately want to discount it and say it's fake or it's rigged or whatever. James, this latest polling that we've seen, 36% approval rating for Donald Trump, 50% approval rating for Donald Trump in swing states and counties. A little bit better, but no one's out there trumpeting how fantastic it is that you have 50% in the swing counties that you had to win in order to win the election. Fake or not, these polls are terrible for Donald Trump.
Listen, you're right, yes, but I do think it's a little bit too early in his presidency to be completely worried about polls. I think let him see what he can do a little bit, and then we'll try to repoll at a different date. But I do think people use polls when they're convenient for them, and they ignore them when they're not. And that was the case in the presidential election that we just had. It's a case in everything. When I ran for city council, I won a straw poll. That obviously didn't mean anything. But, you know, you kind of hope that the polls will always be in your favor. In this case, they're not in Donald Trump's favor, but that doesn't really mean much right now.
Huge difference between a straw poll and a scientific poll conducted across the country. Shannon, I guess the question here is this: do politicians still believe polls? Because when I hear people talk about fake news and fake polls and all this other stuff, I know there are politicians running polls in the Senate race. I know the Trump administration is out there polling. Kellyanne Conway, one of his top advisors, is a pollster. So they truly believe in the polls. This is just politics, right? Politicians
absolutely, positively believe in polls. And they also have the ability to do polls and to change the sample size. There are so many different ways in doing the polls. But when you have so many polls that are across the board showing similarities, not just one outlier poll, they're all showing similar trends. And they absolutely believe it. Not only that, when the polls are good, as James said, they use the polls to go to donors and say, look how good I'm doing, give me money, right? So yes, polls, it's easy for people to say, well, the polls don't mean anything. This many polls do mean something.
Yeah, and James, 50% approval rating, a couple months into your presidency, that's not good.
How's that going to impact what Donald Trump does, though? I think it is still too early for that to really matter.
Okay. I think that it will impact the next thing they're trying to do, and that is the full repeal of Obamacare. Overnight, they changed, and it basically went from repeal and replace to repeal, ... replace. And we're talking about a full repeal, and this is what Mitch McConnell wants at this point, apparently, a full repeal followed by a 2-year window where they work on a replacement. I'll be honest with you. If this passes, I'll be very surprised. However, if they get a repeal, I'll be even more surprised that there ever is a replacement. Shannon, is this repeal ... replace? Is this the way to go right now? This is what they promised when they ran. They won the House, they won the Senate, they won the presidency. Is this what they promised?
They promised, but none of this matters. That's campaign stuff. We get into these slogans. These are real people out here, right? These are real people, real constituents that show up in their neighborhoods that have various conditions and various problems, whether it's small business people who have employers or whatnot. It's about governing. This is a real problem. We're at about, plan A, plan B. We're probably about plan C right now with the full repeal and giving some time to replace. But it's difficult. I don't care if you have the White House, the Senate, and the Congress. When you have to govern, you're dealing with real people's lives.
So I called this repeal ... replace. Maybe it should actually be repeal, replace. I mean, because that kind of seems like where we are. At this point, it looks like McConnell just wants to get a win. And this may be the path to victory, if we're going to quote James. I mean, is that what this looks like?
Path to victory, I think it's a path of least resistance. I think this has been a shapeshifter if I've ever seen one, and kudos to Senator Rand Paul. He's been the one saying the whole time, repeal, repeal, repeal. No one was listening to him. Now they're coming all back around, and it looks like that's what they're going to try to do. It's a path of least resistance. Now, is that a win? I don't really know. It doesn't mean that the Republicans have done anything necessarily great.
It just, to me, looks like they want to fulfill something, Shannon.
But I would just say, it's not that they're just listening to him. They always knew that was an option, but they were trying a couple of things first to get to just what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Like, well, hey, we tried this, we tried that. And some of these things in Congress are not about the win. It's about being able to say we attempted when they have to go in for re-election and go back to the neighborhood.
It's hard to go back to the neighborhood and say, hey, we won the House, we won the Senate, we won the presidency. Give us something else.
But that's their fault. Because
I agree.
They got into campaign mode and they stepped away from explaining to people how difficult it is to govern.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Shannon Reeves, James Lomax, thank you very much for being here. When we continue on Yellowhammer TV Live, we'll talk about the United States Senate race here in Alabama. Some endorsements have started to come down. Do they matter? And what's the status of that race? We'll get into that next. Welcome back to Yellowhammer TV Live. My panelists today, Shannon Reeves and James Lomax. We're going to talk about this United States Senate race here in the great state of Alabama. We've seen a couple endorsements, guys, that have come in. I guess my first question before we get into what these endorsements actually are, do they matter at this point? We are less than a month away. You saw the endorsement of one of the 9 candidates, and I made a joke on social media before we knew why he was dropping out, and I said, you know, this will really help Congressman Mo Brooks that Dom Gentile is endorsing him. By the way, how many members of Dom Gentile's immediate family are there? Because I don't know how much support this guy actually has, but you take these endorsements. There's no question about it. Shannon, do endorsements matter at all?
Endorsements, to qualify it. When you're running a campaign, you take every vote you can possibly get.
Absolutely.
Anything that can give you any type of momentum. Whoever's endorsing you has a barber, has someone that likes them that says, yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and do what he said. In the larger scheme of things, you don't run a campaign on endorsements. It's actual manpower on the ground, knocking on doors, contacting voters.
I'm going to run through a list of who endorsed who so far. Congressman Mo Brooks has another United States Senate candidate who drops out and endorsed him. His wife went through a cancer battle, and he says he's out for that reason. Luther Strange has Perry Hooper Jr., who claims himself to be part of the Trump campaign, but there have been multiple people that question that. Randy Brinson, Roger Stone, a national figure, and Roy Moore has Sirhan Stacy from the University of Alabama endorsing him. Do any of these matter, James, to anybody?
No, I don't think they matter at all. I mean, who are some of those people is the question there. I think endorsements are definitely a credibility battle, and I think you can go back to the presidential election we just had and look at, in the primary in South Carolina, for instance, Marco Rubio had endorsements of all the big names in South Carolina. He had Nikki Haley, Tim Scott, Trey Gowdy, all very popular figures, came in second to Donald Trump. The endorsements don't matter. The credibility, but in this case, they're not going to matter much.
I want to go back to this endorsement stuff. I assume at some point in time we'll see major media outlets in the state at least weigh in on this with their official endorsements. Shannon, you're an assistant professor of political science. They probably meant a lot more in the past, where you would get a newspaper and you would open it up and see an endorsement and you read why they endorsed it. Well, today you can learn their positions every single day by going to their website or reading their social media feed or watching shows like Yellowhammer TV Live or going to yellowhammernews.com. So you get a lot more with these folks. You're not waiting for opinion leaders to tell you what. I mean, stuff like shows like these are somewhat entertainment on top of information. But the information you can gather elsewhere. So do they lose a little bit of their clout?
I don't know about that. I think you have to think about all voters aren't the same. Voters have different classifications of interest and activism and knowledge. So from the standpoint where endorsements do matter, is for those who are lazy voters who don't participate, who may just go to the news and say, I see the newspaper endorsed them, or
I know
someone in
this
my
person, they
community,
endorse them.
they're going with him. And those are lazy voters, that ride on those who are active and who actually participate full time. But for the larger scheme of things, for those who are activists, is that necessarily going to move voters into that candidate's direction? Maybe not. But then again, there are those, if you may be a Christian conservative and you have certain Christian conservative leaders that say, hey, this candidate is the most conservative candidate, it will actually make a difference.
James, is there an endorsement that one of these candidates should be chasing? Maybe another Senate candidate in the race that they want? Again, we always say it's a three-man race. Congressman Brooks, Senator Strange, Judge Moore, those are the three big dogs right now. Is there an endorsement one of them should be chasing?
I mean, it absolutely does matter. I mean, I think a Tripp Pittman could bring you some Baldwin County votes. Randy Brinson could probably bring you some evangelical votes. But other than that, barring an endorsement from Jesus or Donald Trump, I don't think any endorsements would matter at this point.
What if Nick Saban endorsed somebody? then it matters. Then we can probably think of an endorsement.
You'd be surprised how many football fans will say, because that is Jesus to some people. He's Jesus to some people.
Yeah, no, real quick here before we end this segment, the status of this race right now. We've seen some attack ads finally start. We've watched and we've discussed them on this program last week. Congressman Brooks being tied to Nancy Pelosi. Now he's come out and said that's ridiculous, but those ads obviously are still continuing. What's the status of the race right now, Shannon?
I think those ads are making a difference. I don't have any data to support it. But if the line of attack, just by experience, if Luther Strange's campaign is doubling down and spending more money on that ad, that means that ad's being effective in their behind-the-scenes polling. And if that's happening, then that means it's affecting Congressman Brooks. I still see it as Brooks, at Strange, and a runoff.
Okay, wow, okay. James, effective ads, I think we'll agree that they are relatively effective. What can Brooks do in this situation?
Well, listen, I think it's like 2010 where everybody was trying to figure out who's the most conservative. Now you're trying to figure out who's the most of a Trumpite. And I do think it's a silly argument, but I do think it's one that will play. I think Mo Brooks just needs to talk about what he can do as a senator rather than what he can do with the president.
All right, when we come back, we'll wrap up the program with the biggest news of the day. And I've got a closing argument for you, too. You're watching Yellowhammer TV live. Welcome back to Yellowhammer TV Live. Let's get to the biggest news stories of the day. Shannon, you're up first here. Tell us what the biggest news is for you today.
Biggest news story of the day. Game of Thrones is back.
Don't give any spoilers.
That's the biggest. No spoilers. It's the biggest thing. If Washington, D.C. was more like Game of Thrones.
That's the last thing we do. We don't need winter coming in this situation. James, for you, what's the biggest news story
I think
of the day?
they rolled out Vice President Pence to reaffirm that they are going to try to move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And I think that it shows that there's this commitment. But I think it's interesting that they brought out Vice President Pence. I think they did that because he's obviously known as a very Christian conservative, and they want to reaffirm that that's what they're trying to do.
All right, the biggest story for me, the most important thing happening right now, the Ashley Madison hack settlement. You know, I've watched as the Alabama media reported this thing relatively gleefully, but I've noticed they left a couple people out of their coverage, and these are people they should have went to and said, hey, what do you think about this? Let me give you a couple examples. How about AL.com's Chuck Dean? He showed up on that list. Why didn't they go inside their own newsroom and say, hey, are you going to be applying for this money? Also, former Congressman Arthur Davis was also on this list. And oddly enough, they didn't go to that guy either. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be calling these guys out, but it's odd that both of them had the exact same story. Oh, I was hacked, and someone took my picture and put it on a dating website or something. Okay, we're supposed to believe that. Let's go ahead and get to the closing argument. My closing argument for you today is this, folks. Everyone should be held accountable. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you should be holding Republicans and Democrats accountable. If you're out there making the argument that it's okay when your guy does it, you have no credibility when the other guy does it, and you want to hold that guy to account. So just think about that moving forward. Hold everybody accountable. You'll have way more credibility when you do it. We'll see you tomorrow. It's Yellowhammer TV Live with Dale Jackson.
The time.